It's obviously a critical point. We need to make sure that we are responsible fiscal stewards. I do think there are some really direct ways that the board can manage the finances very responsibly. And I have a copy of the superintendent contract here. And in reviewing it, there are some things in here that are fairly excessive that the school board has continued to extend. Things like unused sick leave that accumulates without limitation, which means that the taxpayers are accumulating a liability each time that the superintendent is not using sick days. There is an automobile stipend in here that has no description of constraints on what that stipend would be. And I think it actually demonstrates a reasonable lack of responsibility to have some of these things in the superintendent contract. So I think this is one easy starting place that the board could have some direct access to make some adjustments.
Thank you, Richard. We understand that these are complex fiscal issues, and we appreciate all of you taking the bold points to try and hone in on what you might do first. Katie, Bailey, if you could take a act.
I'll take a hat. You're right. If you look at your property tax bill, 65 is the largest too. So it is something that's really important. We are, of course, held to the increases to the CPI because of property tax caps. But even that said, we need to take the money and we need to be good financial fiscal stewards for our money. About 83% of our budget goes to salaries and benefits. And one thing that we need to look at, of course, we are tied to union contracts, but Mr. Reese is right. We'll be talking about, we'll be renegotiating the contract with one thing that comes up in 2012. And the second thing is non-contract administrative increases can always be looked at. They should be looked at annually. Those are two areas we can look at when you're talking about 83% of your budget going to salaries and benefits. That's the first area you look at. Thanks.
Thank you, Katie. JB?
For the fiscal, like I said, it's a fiduciary duty I think the board members have. And first thing, I'd take kind of a page what the city council did. I would have the community input where they took, I think, 3 Saturdays, invited citizens in to kind of brainstorm in different ways to cut and save costs in the budget. I think that was a good idea. Unfortunately, it didn't stop New York City Council from keeping things, our fees and taxes down, but my hope is it would keep the costs down for our district. I'd also have, about every 5 years, we do a forensic or performance audit on the budget. That would be, I think, would start to get into the things that Mr. Rick has said about some of the smaller things that tend to get lost in the shuffle. Those are the two major things, but the last one, again, is this union contract coming up in 2012. I think that's going to be a watershed, not only for our fiscal responsibility, but also for the educational performance of our kids going forward.
Thank you. Terry?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. What would I do to hold the line on taxes? Well, let's put the facts out there. There are, right now, District 65 has a $100 million budget. We have roughly 1,000 employees. 80% of that is our teachers and our employees. And what I would do my best to ensure that we can hold the line. But the facts are that District 65 is a phenomenal steward of your tax dollars. 8 straight years of balanced budgets, 2 clean fiscal audits. So after making that assumption, what I would then do is to look around and ask you what you expect out of schools. Well, we do know that we don't necessarily want outrageous class size like we have in some other parts of the city or the country. So with that said, our schools are very important to the vitality of this city because it attracts people to live here, it attracts businesses here, and it's something that we're extremely proud of. With that said, in terms of holding the line, I would ensure, like we always do, that we're looking at every aspect of the budget. And it's very difficult to reduce the budget of the school system unless you're going to get rid of some teachers. We've gone through a similar exercise 2 years ago when I was finance chair, and it's somewhat difficult, but you can do it, to look at non-purchase services. So holding the line is very important, but it is a complex issue, one that I think we do manage well in this city.
Thank you, Keith. And that leaves Eileen Fletcher.
My general approach would be that we use the most conservative estimates of what's going to happen to the economy when we make big decisions, as with our possible space issues that are coming up, and when we consider potentially building a new school. I think we have to be willing to look at all potential options before we do something like building a $13 million school. So I know that there are multiple estimates of what's going to happen with the population based on the demographers' work, and I think we need to go with the most conservative of those when we move forward with that decision. I think that we need to do everything we can when we do renegotiate teacher contracts to make sure that we're careful and not too overly generous, but at the same time, we need to keep our teachers' salaries competitive with other districts, because the most important employees in the district are the teachers, and that's what makes or breaks our children's education. So that's a tough balancing act to attract the best, yet also be good stewards of our taxpayer dollars.
Thank you. Now I'll turn to the District 202 candidates, and John Baum, if you could lead off, please. And we were temporarily without our timekeeper, so you got away with it for extra seconds, but we're all back on the clock now.
I think the ETHS has been very financially well managed, but these are very tough times, and you have to squeeze the most out of every dollar. When I was on the 65 board, I just say the problem is you have to choose between the good and the good when you're choosing what you're going to spend your money on. But I do think there is a particular role for scrutinizing expenditures. And I thought it was illustrated quite well recently, and I think it was the most recent District 202 board meeting. There was a report on the several reading programs that the school has for struggling readers, and we have a number of those programs. And one of the programs that was reported that for the last 3 years in a row, the percentage of students who had met expected levels under the program had declined, and for those same 3 years in a row, the percentage of students who had experienced what was called negative growth had increased to some 30-some%. So I was stunned when I got to the conclusion of the report, and there was no discussion about, should we get rid of this program? Should we tweak it? Should we, should we make some fundamental change? And I think you need to have that level of scrutiny of programs, because tax dollars are limited, and we can't just keep giving it to people.
Thank you, Jonathan. Scott, you prefer to be called Scott? Scott's good. Then I can call you Mr. Rochelle.
That's my dad. When dealing with education and financing, it's no secret that the majority of the money goes towards your workforce. And if you're going to make cuts, you got to make them as far away from the classroom as possible. And that's all I'm going to say on that part, because it's true. Our children are the most affected by the finances that go in. The kids are in need of not just educators, but quality educators. And so at this point, I can't advocate for cutting workforce, but I will say this. We need, and I believe Jonathan said, we need to get the most bang for our buck. And we have programs that we're throwing money into, some good, some bad. We need a critical eye towards those programs. We need to know not only what's working, what isn't working, we need to be able to communicate exactly what programs are doing what. Because as stakeholders, as community members, you all deserve that.
Thank you. Jane Collins.
I'm really glad to have the opportunity to hear what the 65 candidates have to say about their budget. It's always interesting to see how the other half lives. You know, we're under tax caps. We've had a balanced budget for the last 4 years. We have a AAA rating. We're not doing too badly, but it is important that we manage our money wisely. I understand from the administration that we're looking to non-replace several retiring staff. And the administration is looking to cut about $1 million in the budget in the next 2 years. So we are tightening as much as we can.
Thank you. Say David.
Thank you. The idea I live by when it comes to budgeting, you should hope for the best, and you should plan for the worst. And probably a good thing that we've had that attitude for a while now, because it's been a tough time, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. I don't think there's any question about that. As Jane said, we have done, I think, an excellent job of budgeting and staying to our budget, keeping balanced. AAA rating is enviable, and by many school districts. One of some of the things we've got to do to hold the line in spending, of course, is what I mentioned earlier, values-based budgeting. And what that means simply is putting money where our mouth is, putting the money behind the things we value most and the things which impact our children the most in the classroom. So we're going to try to protect the students from the ravages of these budget crises as much as possible. Over the last 4 years, the portion of our budget that is spent on administration has decreased as a percentage. In fact, in this last year, it actually decreased as a dollar amount as well. So we're going to have to continue that as much as we can. Again, it goes along with that idea of values-based budget. Other things, I think Jonathan touched on it, evaluate and eliminate programs that aren't working. Really get after it. There's more, but time's up.